Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session on Azure DevOps open source integrations. I'm Arun Chandrasekhar. I'm the Principal Program Manager for Azure open source integration. So basically things such as Jenkins, Terraform, Ansible, and so on. And with me is PC, who's the Program Manager for Jenkins integrations. Let's go to the next slide. So just to give you some context before we get started, in the past year since my last talk in the Jenkins world about a year back, I spent a bunch of time talking to a lot of customers, some of whom are probably in this room, about like 30 or so top sort of enterprise customers who are using Jenkins. And I've typically found that they fall broadly into two buckets. And so we have structured this session into those two buckets. The overarching theme is that customers want to be able to want us to fit into their multi-cloud strategy rather than them trying to figure out how to use Azure tools. So that's exactly what we've done. And this is sort of a two approaches. There's one cohort of customers who focus more on, I want to take control of everything. I want everything, infrastructure, to be something that I own and I manage. So that's one type of DevOps customer. That's sort of the deploy to Kubernetes side of things. And then the other side is about customers who just want to use the best of breed that is out there. So like they want to say, OK, you take care of the infrastructure problems for me, and we'll figure out what's the best way to build our apps on your platform. So that's sort of the second cohort, which is about using our services, such as web apps on Azure. And we've basically taken all the tools that you see on the screen and integrated them natively with these two sort of segments of customers, for these two segments of customers. So I wanted to start with the first section. So we want to go before that, let's just first do a little bit of a recap about what has happened since the last year. So PC, you want to?
Hi, I'm PC. I'm very excited to be here today. So I just want to do a quick recap of what we have done since last Jenkins World when Arun was here presenting. For those of you who are looking to run a Jenkins master on Azure, we actually have a one-click solution now in Azure Marketplace. In less than 10 minutes, you can actually spin up a VM with Jenkins on it, and you are up and running. So you get to select the VM disk type that you want to use, and also the Jenkins release type that you need. I know a lot of you are looking into checking config in code, so we make sure we updated all our plugins and make sure that they are pipeline ready. And also, as Arun mentioned earlier, we have our first deploy to Azure support. There is an app service plugin, and I'll be showing you a demo later. Finally, for documentation, we want to make it easier for you to get all Jenkins on Azure related resources. So we created a Jenkins Hub, aka.ms AZ Jenkins Hub. So go and check it out. It's a one-stop shop for you to get all Azure Jenkins on Azure related resources. Okay, Arun?
Yeah. So let's go on to the first sort of chunk of this session, which is about Kubernetes. Now, Microsoft and Azure is obviously all in on Kubernetes. For those of you who are following, the co-creator of Kubernetes, Brendan Burns, is sort of the main engineering manager for a lot of the work that we're showing here. We also see that there's a huge mega trend towards Kubernetes. If you look at the news, like just pick the news from today, we look at CoreOS with Tectonic, which supports Kubernetes as a native platform. A few weeks ago, we had Red Hat with OpenShift supporting Kubernetes natively. So we have sort of we're seeing that Kubernetes is emerging as one of the solutions for building out a cloud agnostic app platform on top of sort of core infrastructure that Azure and other clouds provide. So what we've done is really figured out a way to how do we make Kubernetes best of breed on Azure. So there are two sets of things. In the platform, we have the Azure Container Service, which basically lets you provide like Kubernetes out of the box, and you can just go and start using it on Azure. We also have a fully PaaS solution where you don't have to do any infrastructure management called Azure Container Instance. And finally, in order to push your containers into Azure, we have something called Azure Container Registry. And we have a whole ecosystem of tools that we have integrated with this. We had the Days acquisition, where we went and talked about, we had like things like Draft and Helm and all those things that integrate natively to Kubernetes. We also have things like Spinnaker, and then as you see on this screen, we have Terraform and native support for Docker Hub. So why is this so important? The reason this is kind of critical is because anybody who wants to build a multi-cloud platform who belongs to sort of that segment of customer who's reasonably mature and is trying to build out containerized applications wants to create something that's built on top of an immutable infrastructure, right? So you want to be able to say, I want my tools to understand bake and deploy kind of semantics. And so if you look at this, what we've done here is we have taken Terraform as our provisioner for deploying infrastructure on Azure, and we're using Jenkins as our primary sort of delivery pipeline, right? And this should be pretty familiar to any of you who are invested in Kubernetes. And the biggest advantage of doing that is you can use the same delivery platform and the same delivery pipeline across like your on-premise or your, and the cloud, or even across cloud providers, right? So this becomes like a pretty important platform for you to say, okay, I have a fully open source tool chain that can work across the board. So we made sure that each of these integrate really, really well with Azure. So PC is now going to show you a demo which sort of shows most of these integrations.
Thanks, Arun. So before I dive into the demo, I want to give you a high-level overview of the Java app I'm going to use. So the front end is actually deployed to app service on Linux. It's a Java Spring Boot app. The data app is a REST API and is deployed to Kubernetes clusters on Azure. So it uses MySQL in the back end. It's running on Azure, and also Azure storage for the media content. Let me switch over to the actual app.
While she's doing that, just a quick show of hands. How many of you are familiar with the Azure concepts that we're talking about here, or how many of you are using Azure for your workloads? Okay, not bad. So this is like about a third of the room. So I think we still need to explain some of these concepts as we go then, because like majority of the room still.
Oh, I did forget to mention that everything is written in Java except for one, which is function. So that is simply because we don't have Java support for function yet. But we will be adding that. So the function app is actually written in Node. So this is we call that our movie DB. It kind of like IMDb. You can click into the movie and upload an image. Now that's not the demo. I'm not going to do that. And the data. This is the data app. Basically, it's like for instance, let's say I go back to the UI, right? Right now, what I'm showing here is a thumbnail, the rank and title, and which is exactly what I'll zoom in. I'm not sure whether this is big enough for you to see. So as you can see, it's getting the ID, name, description, and also the image URI, okay? So what my demo is going to do is I'm going to add an additional column called rating. And I'm going to first deploy the data app to update the data app. I'll switch over to Jenkins master now. All right. Can you see the bottom? It's important to see something. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, and I'm going to kick off the build for the data app. Well, it's going to, because it's actually built, see how the agent spin up immediately? So it's actually built in a container agent that is on Azure. It's running right now, and I'm going to let it run here and switch over and show you the config. I have all the tabs open already, so just for the sake of saving time, okay? If you look at this is the pipeline project that we created. We are using an existing plugin called the environment and injector plugin, and passing in some key value that is important for the Jenkins file. Most importantly is actually the Azure credential. There you go. So the Azure credential ID, which actually we store using our Azure credential plugin, so that you will have the service principal that you can use in the plugin. There's other variable as well, and
So just to point out here, the Azure credentials are now natively integrated into the Jenkins credential store, so you don't need another secret store like Vault or Key Vault to do that. And this also gives you sort of what we want to do in the roadmap in the future, where we get tighter single sign-on and AAD integration, right? So this sort of is the first baby step towards that.
So it's pulling the source code from a GitHub repo and running the branch rating to add the rating column to the data app. Now, this is just for demo. It's not the right way to do things. You should only have one Jenkins file, but just for the sake of time, we are doing it this way. Just want to call that out. And this is the Jenkins file. Let me see whether it's big enough. Let me zoom in. So as mentioned earlier, the build is run on a container agent on Azure, and the label is container. That's why it's looking for a container agent and spin it up. And it's using Maven to build the project, all right? And after that, it's using Docker to put an image and push it to Docker registry. And finally, we use the Kubernetes plugin to deploy to the Kubernetes cluster on Azure. As I was telling you just now, for instance, the service principal ID is used here in the plugin.
So for those of you not familiar with Azure, service principal is sort of like a system account that you can give access to with credentials, and that will, on behalf of Jenkins, perform operations on Azure resources, right?
So I think that probably the job is still running. So I want to give you a high-level overview of the plugins, and then we switch back to the data app and show you the results. So we have a new Azure Container Agent. It will allow you to spin up so Jenkins master will look for the agent. Like my demo, it was looking for the agent called container. And it will execute a job if it exists and if it's online. If not, we are calling ACS and pull the image from Docker Hub or ACR for my demo. And then we will create a pod in Kubernetes on Azure.
Yeah, and the ACI is a very powerful new service that we have released, which is called the Azure Container Instance. So in the case where you don't want to manage even your Kubernetes infrastructure on your own, all you would need to do is to say, okay, tell Jenkins that you can use this Azure Container Instance and just generate as many as you want based on the load that Jenkins needs. And I think that's the perfect sweet spot for doing CI, because now you have this elastic set of containerized agents that can do your build, and you don't have to worry about managing the underlying infrastructure. So that's, I think, a pretty useful tool there. And ACR, again, for audience who's not Azure familiar, is a private Docker registry. It talks exactly the same semantics and API as the Docker registry. It's just something that you can use privately for your own images, which is not just the public Docker Hub, but for images that you want to share only within your team, right?
Yep, that's right. So the second plugin that we use is the Deploy to Kubernetes plugin. So when we look into this, we realize that the deployment steps is actually common for all Kubernetes. We want to contribute to open source. So this plugin, you can actually use it to deploy to any configured Kubernetes, not just Azure.
So this is pretty powerful, because what we've done now is contributed, like we had the original Kubernetes plugin that I think you would have heard of if you were in the previous session, where we are talking about how to do CI and builds using Kubernetes, and that was, again, an open source community effort kickstarted by Google. And now we have like a deployment plugin that we've contributed for Kubernetes that will, again, be able to work against any cloud. So you can work against Azure or Google Cloud or other clouds, right? So this sort of the power of OSS in my mind is that we can sort of leverage each other, and we differentiate based on the power of our end service platform, and not sort of compete on the actual tooling that drives that platform, right?
That's right. So the plugin, there are already a lot of plugins out there to do the Docker file, to build the Docker image and push to Docker registry. So we don't do that, but the plugin will deploy the secrets in Kubernetes, get the image tag out from the output, the build output, and put it in the YAML file, and then push it to deploy to Kubernetes. Now, of course, we actually have another plugin that is Azure specific. So this plugin is based on the generic Kubernetes plugin. And on top of that, it's optimized for the Azure experience, and we will support the other two orchestrators that ACS support, which is DCOS and Docker Swarm. So let me switch back to the app and make sure that it's deployed. see, the rating is added. All right?
So this is sort of the back-end part of the demo, and then now we're going to shift to sort of what we're going to do in the front end. So with this, we come to sort of the app service offering that Azure has. Azure has an app service offering for all its sort of platform as a service type things where you don't have to worry about managing the infrastructure on your own. This includes a lot of serverless technologies like functions, and we released Event Grid recently, but also includes web apps. So you can just have a web app and put it on a Tomcat container on app service. And we recently released support for app service with Linux containers. And that's kind of what we're going to be leveraging here, because the theme is really that we use containers. You can use them with Kubernetes, where you want to control the scheduler. But this is for the other segment of customers. And I've heard a lot of Java enterprise developers who are really, really keen on this flow, where like Azure take care of stuff for me. I don't want to really, like, I don't want to define how to do the ops portion of it. I want minimal ops. And I want to do most of the dev-focused scenarios. And one of the things that pleasantly surprised me was yesterday on the booth floor, I was talking to Tyler, who's the Jenkins community lead. And as you know, like last year, we talked about how Jenkins itself runs on Azure. And what he is doing is he's effectively saying that instead of using Elk and setting up his own infrastructure with Elk, he's using OMS, which is an operations management suite that Azure has. So this is a very common pattern where people who are first come into Azure, they do everything on their own, and then they find some value-added services that they would like to use, right? So, and they don't care about it being sticky. If it is something like logging, where you don't really care about how cloud agnostic you want to get. And the next evolution of this is, I as a web app developer want to use container as my abstraction, or I want to use application as my abstraction. And that's where the web app thing comes. And what we're going to show here is how do you use somebody who wants to have a very simple, familiar tool chain using Jenkins with Java, for instance. How will they go about publishing and deploying to web apps? And you also see that in the future, we're going to support things like functions once we have deeper support for Java and functions, which is coming pretty soon.
By the way, for those of you who are not familiar, function is the equivalent would be Lambda on AWS.
Yeah.
Let's show the demo, the second half of the demo, which is to update the front end. I'll switch back to Jenkins. I'll use Blue Ocean directly this time. So let me go back to the top. And this is the one I want to run. I'm just going to click and look. This, the build is also run in an agent, the container agent in the cloud. So this time, because it already exists, it didn't have to wait at all, and it's being pushed off. All right. So, and this is the sorry about that. This is the project. This is the project. The pipeline project we set up for updating the front end. Same deal, we are using the environment injector plugin to pass in some variables that is needed by the Jenkins file. And here, we are also running the same, using the same repo. And I will show you.
Again, just a point about the way the repo is structured. As she mentioned earlier, we are doing this as sort of a fork where we are saying that we have Jenkins file hyphen something. Ideally, what you would want to do is create do trunk-based development, where you're just putting everything in master and you're releasing from master, and you just have one Jenkins file in your master branch that encapsulates or composes other lower-level apps. So don't take this as the best practice way to do it. This is just more an approach for demo. But you can everything we're showing here, you can use the best practice way to do it as Jenkins best recommends, right?
That's right. So it's doing the same Maven, using Maven to build the project, and then it's just using a simple using the plugin to push the web app to app service on Linux.
So this is again a fantastic collaboration here, because we look at it, we're actually taking our app service plugin, but then we're doing our Docker build and Docker push using the plugin by Docker, right? So this is like a perfect combination of what we are good at, which is actually the actual platform for hosting our apps, and then what Docker is great at, which is actual build and push of the image itself, right?
So just to provide a high-level overview of the plugin, you can actually deploy any web app written in all the languages supported by app service, like PHP, Java, etc. So for app service on Linux, though, for app service, you can use Git or FTP to upload your build artifact. Okay, but for app service in plugin, we support an additional way to deploy, which is via Docker. All you have to do is supply a Docker file, and then the plugin will basically grab will build the image for you and push it to a registry. You can use Docker Hub or Azure Container Registry. Up to you.
And the main reason you'd use container registry is because you want to have a private set of images, as I mentioned earlier. So you want to just, which is probably the more common scenario. But Docker Hub, you can just retrieve your underlying platform images like Ubuntu or Nginx and so on, right?
So how many of you here are Java developers? Not a lot.
Not a lot, okay, that's surprising, okay.
All right, then I'll do a really quick update, okay? We actually have increased our Java investment in Azure. We want to make sure that Azure is first-class citizen, Java is first-class citizen in Azure. We have a team right now who is working on the developer experience and make sure that it's better. If you have been following the Azure blog, we announced the support for Cosmos DB, Azure Container Service and Registry in the Azure SDK. We have the Spring Boot starters for Azure services. For the Maven developer experience, we have new plugins to support deploying to app service on Linux and also Kubernetes. Apart from that, from the IntelliJ and for IntelliJ and Eclipse, we also have the plugin to deploy to app service on Linux. And most importantly, we now support IntelliJ Community Edition. Coming soon will be our support for Java in function.
Yes, just to highlight here, what we're talking about here is not just doing point solution for Jenkins with something, right? So as a developer, we want to take you through your entire life cycle, and we've done it already for other languages such as, say, Node or Python or PHP, where you can just start from your tool of choice. It could be like Visual Studio Code or Sublime or whatever you want, and then go all the way till you deploy to production. So we are looking at basically ensuring that you're comfortable working with Azure artifacts right from the get-go, because the key thing in DevOps is you want consistency across both your dev environments, your test environments, all the way to production, right? You don't want to have different semantics for doing these things. And that's why you see a whole bunch of integration that we have with the IDE, with the build system, and then all the way to the SDK. So that gives you a sort of end-to-end for Java, and we're also doing that for other languages. So just as a question, how many of you are who are not Java developers, are like Node, or how many of you are focusing on sort of the mean stack or JavaScript based? Okay. So it's interesting. Maybe how many of you consider yourself ops and less DevOps? Okay. So that's interesting. So I think we should capture this in the survey as to what is the language that most of you guys are doing. It's kind of spread out. It's an even mix of different languages, which is the reality. Okay.
We do have that
question there.
The
Yeah,
survey,
we'll find out. Okay.
Yeah. All right, this is Jenkins world, so let me go back to Jenkins. For our roadmap, the 3 plugins that I mentioned previously, we are code complete. You cannot use it just yet, but it's just going through the release process. So in the next 2 weeks, they should be available in Jenkins.io. By September, we will be adding the feature to deploy to VM skill set. So you can think of VM skill set with the auto scaling group in AWS. Coming next will be, I think Arun mentioned it just now, we'll be adding the keyword support to the Azure Credential plugin. And we will, once function is ready for Java, then we will add the native support so that you can deploy directly to function. In the future, we'll look more into hosted Jenkins, high availability, single sign-on, and AAD, as Arun mentioned.
Yeah, and just for the future, like today with the solution template, you can pretty much do everything that you want to do to set up a secure Jenkins master on Azure. But we want to get to the point where you don't even have to worry about how much of that infrastructure you're managing. That's where the high availability piece comes in. So you can effectively stitch together your own today, but it's about like how much we can help you avoid some of that ops overhead that you would sort of face when you're doing that.
Let's go over to the demo and and see whether it's deployed.
Yeah, for the front end.
Yeah. So I'm going to refresh the front, the page. Sometimes it takes a while. Do you want to go into Q&A first?
Yeah. So before we do Q&A, just to wrap, so one of the things that we are trying to show as part of the session is sort of the Jenkins integrations that we started off with about a year ago with some CI support, but now we've sort of come a long way where we started supporting more containerized workloads, and we're going to do sort of a more support for the immutable flows with VM scale sets and so on. So now Jenkins becomes sort of our primary integration point for CI/CD workloads on Azure, right? So we're really, really investing in this, and our team is growing, and that becomes sort of one of the focus that we're focusing on in terms of being all in on Jenkins. But there's also a broader ecosystem that I'm working on that includes things such as Netflix Spinnaker, Hashicorp's Terraform, Red Hat's Ansible, and making sure that all those tools work on Azure as well as Jenkins. So just to give you context, we're also investing in a huge partnership with Terraform. And if any of you are interested in sort of broader OSS integrations, there's my email there, ACHAND. You can definitely come and ping me. And I can also add you to our Slack channel and our advisory board. And you should definitely talk to PC for any Jenkins-specific requirements on Azure. And we're really, really interested in understanding any of your requirements in the cloud in general, just so we ensure that we get close the gap on any of the requirements you have on Azure when it comes to Jenkins specifically. And in order to, like one of the things I just want to point out there is we have a survey there, ak.ms/Azure loves Jenkins. This is your chance to sort of help prioritize our features. The more of you actually use that survey, your voice is definitely going to be heard. People who have been there last year, we had about 30 customers who will, and I've gone and talked to each and every one of the people who have actually responded to that survey. So it's something that we really take very seriously. So I encourage you to do that, and we also have a booth where you get a chance to win an Xbox One S if you do the survey. And we're just getting started on the OSS development experience with Jenkins. In my mind, we're pretty new to this, but I think we're getting really, really good at it, and I hope that you'll help us in this journey that we're coming out with. And any questions at this point? Yeah. So sorry, could you repeat the question?
So all the web app and the web app that you have, is it going to have some kind of a persistent data store to hold all this data information?
MySQL.
Yeah, so MySQL is available as a fully big managed service on Azure. So we support MySQL just as much as we support PostgreSQL and we support SQL Server. So you can effectively you don't have to worry about, again, maintain the infrastructure of your MySQL store. You can just go and use MySQL as an Azure database. So it's a native store in Azure today. And we support a whole bunch of other stores that you can just look up on. If you just search for Azure database, we support about 3 or 4 different open source stores. MySQL, Postgre, we have Redis for a cache, and of course we have the whole Hadoop stack for things like HD Insights and so on. App service plugin. The question is, what is the timeline for the app service plugin?
Ansible.
Ansible. So Ansible is what we are currently actively working on. One of the things that we're doing is having a really close partnership with Red Hat, and we just had a Hackfest last week or a couple of weeks back. So I think Ansible, we currently have a decent story for you to use ARM and just provision your infrastructure using Ansible. ARM is our Azure Resource Manager. Think of it as the equivalent of Terraform, but for Azure, or CloudFormation, but for Azure. What we want to do is effectively have native support similar to what we have in Jenkins for every single Azure resource that matters. So again, it's more about just increasing the scope. Today, you can do complete deployments using Ansible on Azure, that we sort of finished, and now the next step is to go broad and support all the other Azure targets. So that's going to be our current focus for over the next 6 months. So that you won't see huge announcements, but we'll eventually get there. So.
By the way, the rating column is added to the front end, as you can see.
Yeah, so this shows like sort of the hybrid mix that we have, right? We used a fully PaaS Azure Web App Service, which is where you don't manage the infrastructure in the front end, and in the back end here we're showing Kubernetes where you manage the infrastructure. So now the idea is we give you the sort of complete flexibility to choose what you want. Like there's no, oh, you're tied to, not to name another cloud provider, but you're tied to one single way of doing things. Either if it's Google, you would say you want to manage like Kubernetes, or if you're doing ECS in Amazon. But the way that we do it is we say, okay, if you use ACS, you can use any orchestrator. You can use Mesos with DCOS, you can use Swarm, you can use Kubernetes, or you can just spin up your own. Or if you're using Kubernetes, then you can do Kubernetes directly without worrying about being sticky with Azure. Or if you're using Docker, then you can use Azure Container Instance. So we give you sort of I think the best suite of capabilities where you can pick and choose what you care about. It's about the tools that you know and that you love and you're comfortable with, and not something that we will enforce on you, right? That's kind of the approach that we've been following, and we've found quite a lot of success in that because we've seen a lot of Jenkins users, and our growth is pretty decent in the Jenkins community. Any other questions? So did any of you have like a fundamental problem with moving to the cloud that you want to sort of share, maybe, like in terms of you're at the point where, how many of you are actually looking to lift and shift into the cloud at this point, into any cloud? Okay, that's pretty decent. So we have like maybe 1/3 again of the room is about interested in lifting and shifting to the cloud. So just another point that I was making on the booth floor when somebody asked me is like, what happens if you have, I'm on-premise, right, and I'm not planning to go to the public cloud. What is our story there? Like I have Jenkins, so we have two stories there. One is you can use your own Jenkins master as is and just push your dev test workloads into the cloud using our build agents or our containerized CI and so on. But you can also do another thing where you have Azure Stack, which is sort of a public cloud that you bring into your own infrastructure. So it's sort of like you take the same public cloud semantics that Azure has, and you can just craft your own infrastructure in such a way that in the future, like maybe in a year or two when you're ready to move to the public cloud, there is no lift and shift as you would want to do with, say, VMware, with AWS or anything. It's just, you just press a button and it's just there, right? Because you're already talking the same language that Azure already understands. So we're sort of the inverse of what VMware and AWS try to do, which is they'd say, okay, you have this private cloud infrastructure, we'll lift and shift this into the cloud. We're saying that we'll bring you the public cloud on-premise, which is the Azure Stack. So it's sort of a nice stepping stone for people who are interested to get into the cloud. We also have a bunch of networking services like ExpressRoute, where you can network and domain join virtual machines for your dev test workloads. Come and talk to us in the booth if you have any specific questions as well.
We'll be at the booth. And also, I think we should mention that we do have a VM agent if you are looking into spinning up a VM to run your build jobs.
Yeah, I think that's the best stepping stone for people who have not yet gone to the public cloud. Just try it out for doing your build or doing your sort of CI, which is the first step in DevOps anyway. And
Tyler is using that, right?
Yeah, Tyler, I mean, Jenkins uses that. Like Jenkins itself uses our CI and build for most of their, like if you do any commits to Jenkins, that goes through into Azure using the Azure VM agents. And they're also looking to do the Kubernetes and start using containerized agents in the future. So I think, and we use it a lot internally as well, like .NET, for instance, is
.NET Core.
.NET Core is built completely using Jenkins on Azure. So it's pretty tested, it's battle tested, it's reasonably production ready. You should be comfortable using that because it's dev test workloads. It's not something that you risk huge amounts of, there's very little risk to that.
Just a reminder again, you stand a chance to win an Xbox if you respond to us away. So, and I'm very happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk to us.
Yeah, and this is PC's very first conference talk, so please be gentle when you're giving her reviews.
Oh, come on. Thank you.
Cool, thank you.